Hello, so good to see you again. Welcome back to this week's episode of Closed by Mo. My name is Mohammed. I'm hopefully your favorite YouTube host on most things real estate. I'm also a real estate investor and a broker based out of New York City. In this week's episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about exactly what Contract Vendee means, purely because I've noticed that this is one of my most popular blog posts on my website, which I'll post the link in the description below. But there's actually two kind of understandings for Contract Vendee. One is the more general one, and one's another that actually applies exclusively, that I've noticed, to New York City and Long Island. Without further ado, let's jump right into this week's video on what is Contract Vendee. Now, to start us off, probably with the more boring definition of what Contract Vendee is, from what I've researched as well as in my blog posts, you'll know that a Contract Vendee is mainly more so like a land contract. Basically, what I mean is, in a Contract Vendee situation, as opposed to a traditional financing situation where someone might just buy, get a mortgage and be able to purchase a property. In a Contract Vendee situation, the seller is basically giving equitable title to the buyer while the seller is still retaining legal title. Meaning the title hasn't really transferred over to the buyer themselves. The buyer has basically entered into a contract or a vendee agreement, or actually in this case a contract vendee agreement with the seller, where the buyer is going to be making regular payments to the seller. Basically, the seller acting as a bank, which is a very similar form of owner financing, where the buyer is making regular payments to the seller, and once those payments have accumulated, or once the buyer has hit the threshold for whatever herself and the seller have agreed upon for a particular number, then the legal title to the property will transfer over to the buyer. During that entire duration, however, the buyer still has equitable title, meaning they're responsible for their taxes on the property and for filing however way they want to file. Basically, the seller and buyer become some sort of like a partnership almost, right? The seller is benefiting because they're getting regular installment payments from the buyer, and the buyer is benefiting because now if they're unable to get the traditional bank financing for the property for whatever reason, maybe it's their credit, the property whatever it is, the buyer is now being able to put themselves in a position where they can eventually purchase that property in installments. Now, the key differentiating factor here between Contract Vendee, which I just described, and another type of Contract Vendee, which is more common in what we'll see in like Long Island, New York, or in New York City, maybe even Westchester County, is basically the second category is more so affiliated with the whole wholesaling industry in real estate. Now, wholesaling, just to give you guys a bit of a background, is when you are basically assigning a contract to another end buyer. Now, to give you a very cut and dry example, let's say there's a property worth $100,000, but you know that if you put in enough money into the property, that market value could be worth a lot more. You as the wholesaler would go to the owner of the property and say, hey, look, your property is not in the best condition, and the owner would also probably agree and understand because they're just trying to get rid of the property for whatever reason. Maybe they know the condition isn't great. Maybe they just need the money to close in 7 days and move out and go to another state. Whatever it is, the seller typically will have a strong motivation to sell quickly, and that's what will motivate them to sell it at a below market price. Now, you as the wholesaler, once you're able to get that property under contract for a specific price, you are then going to try and see if you can assign that contract to an end buyer for a higher price. So let's say, for example, you get that property under contract for $50,000, even though it's worth $100,000, $150,000, whatever it is. Then you can go ahead and sell that contract for $50,000 to another buyer who might want to be flipping that house or whatever it is that they want to do. Maybe they're an investor or they're an end buyer that wants to build their dream house. You could sell that contract to them for $75,000. Basically, the end buyer is the person who's going to be ultimately purchasing that property, and you yourself as a middleman, as a wholesaler, are just pocketing that difference between that 50 and that 75, which is that 25,000 or so. Now, the time in the journey where Contract Vendee comes into place is when you as the wholesaler have a property under contract, but you start to go and list that property as a Contract Vendee property on the MLS, and you're able to basically advertise it publicly. Now, the key differentiator here is when you're wholesaling a contract, when you're wholesaling a property, you normally wouldn't really advertise it as a property that you're selling or that a property that's being available on the market, because remember, you're a wholesaler, you're not an agent, you're not a broker, so you're not technically able to push out that information in the MLS. And if you are an agent or broker and you're getting the wholesale contract and you want to be able to advertise it publicly, you have to exclusively get the permission from the seller in order to post it on the MLS, and thus you're advertising it as a Contract Vendee, basically meaning you are selling that contract to whoever's going to be purchasing it, but you of course have to be completely transparent about it. I'll post a couple of links to a few blog post, not my blog post, from an attorney's office that's pretty active in Long Island with wholesalers and people buying and selling contracts that I think might be very helpful. I hope you guys enjoyed this video in terms of understanding what a contract vendee is when it's not a contract vendee, but it's more so in the wholesaling aspect of things. I'll let you guys go now. Watch my next video. See you guys next week. Bye bye.